housekeeping announcements before we jump into the other material?
Nothing too crazy. I've enabled everyone's microphone, so if there is opportunity to speak, you will be able to do so by enabling it up at the top. And otherwise, I think we are good to go.
Very fine. So why don't we just take a second and go around and have everybody unmute, and 30 seconds or less, tell us who you are. Regina, would you like to go first? Well, how about Vicki? No, it doesn't seem to be working.
I'm with
Virginia
you.
Adams, are
My
you
name
with
is
us?
Virginia Adams. I'm a woman in long-term recovery. I'm also the center manager for the Harvard Recovery Community.
Hi. Well, thank you. Vicki, you want to tell us who you are? No, okay. Regina, sorry.
Hi, I'm Regina Magara. I'm a CCAR emergency, emergency department recovery coach coordinator. I'm a person in long-term recovery myself, and I'm a person with a mental illness. And it's very nice to be here this afternoon.
So glad you're with us. So, Vicki, you able to come on and introduce yourself? No? Okay. Well, I want to start by asking you to simply, when you want to talk, turn on your video camera and unmute your microphone, and unless you've got distractions in the background. Our goal here is to remain fully attentive while we are in session with one another. So I want to start with a short video. It's called Validation, and hopefully the words and the video will be in sync, but we'll give this a try.
George, should the video have sound to it?
Oh, can you not hear it? That's not good. So you're not hearing
No,
the
but I
video at
do
all?
have a video pod over here that Stacy put in. I can try playing it from here. Yeah, not at all.
Yeah, if you don't mind, let's give that a whirl. Huh.
I'm here to get validated.
Well, I'm not seeing the video.
You don't see the video?
I don't.
Are you still
I
sharing
hear
your
it, but I don't
screen?
see it. How weird. Oh, that may be the problem. Let's see. Well, and I don't see how to stop sharing my screen now. Oh, that's weird. Oh,
All right.
now try it. Sorry, folks.
You are awesome.
Excuse me?
You have an amazing face. You've got powerful.
It's still not showing
Yeah,
up.
it's still not showing up.
Why?
No. Hear the video, but not the audio. I mean, I hear the audio, but not the video.
Um,
That makes me think I sent you the wrong file. Is it, well, it's an FLV, but, well, we can do without it. So we are going to watch another video in just a moment, and I think it'll probably work.
I have the
better.
I have the links to the videos too. If you want me to put those
So-
up, maybe that would.
Okay, well, they're in the notes document or the journal, so we folks can actually look at them themselves. We'll try the next video, and if that doesn't work, actually that's the last one we'll watch. So I do want to jump back in and show you this. The next step here is to really get a sense of who is with us, and more importantly, what skills and abilities and resources you bring to the table. And this isn't about talking out loud about it, but I want to invite you to just take a moment to be still and silent. And that was weird. And do this first, I suggest, by giving yourself a validation or the value and worth that you bring to our community. And then secondly, maybe express gratitude to the elders who paved the way, to the folks who are making the joy that you're experiencing and the benefit that you're experiencing in life possible. And maybe even go all the way back to the First Nations people who took such good care of the land that we're actually sitting or standing on at this time, that we are able to enjoy the beauty that exists around us. So if you don't mind, let's just take a moment to be silent and still. So thank you. Were you able to hear that song at all? Did you hear Simon and Garfunkel singing Sound of Silence? No song. Okay. Well, that's interesting. So this is about how we are able to engage in relationship enhancement skills. And a fundamental part of that process is what you just did in the last minute. And I like this quote from George Eliot, who says, if we had a keen vision of all that's ordinary in human life, it would be like hearing the grass grow or the squirrel's heartbeat. And we should die of that roar, which is the other side of silence. I don't think Marianne Evans, who is the author's actual name, but back in the mid to late 1800s, proper women didn't read, much less write. So in order to get her material published, she changed her name. But I don't think she meant literally die, but I think she's talking about the importance of being attuned to what's on that other side of silence, that intuition, that sense of physiological change, and we might call it arousal, that occurs as we are having experience. And it really is about how we're able to regulate back and forth between the external focus on what's going on around us and how our bodies are reacting, and being able to negotiate that so that one doesn't necessarily take dominance over the other. So it's about this notion that as a recovery coach, you and I bring to these interactions a special set of skills. And for me, it comes down to the extent to which I actually am able to hook my wagon up to wherever it is they're going. And I believe there is inside of us core. Some call it spirit, some call it soul, whatever your faith tradition is, that runs through everything. And it's what ultimately determines my effectiveness is how well I'm able to connect that soul or spirit in the other person. And so fundamentally, everything else we talk about is modulated by that sense of being connected to that soul component that's in me and that's also in other people. So this is a picture of me from last week. It was me at the desk in my first job, actually it was my second job, but first job in the behavioral health field. And I was doing crisis intervention, both hotline as well as emergency room responses in Warner Robins, Georgia at the Hodak Community Crisis Center. And I got into this field because I just, like you, probably had this sense of I just want to help people. So I basically took the traditional route, went to school, got degrees, started in physiological psychology of all things, and then that eventually turned into a focus on community psychology. And got licensed and credentialed and eventually wound up spending a 27-year career with the Georgia State Board of Pardons and Paroles and the Department of Community Supervision, and retired from that several years ago. And in the process, decided it was important. I was interested in not just focusing all my time and attention on helping people start recovery and the early recovery process, but I wanted to shift my focus and to go downstream, or rather upstream, and see what could be done to help people who are at that 2, 5, 10, 20-year mark. What do we do to help folks that are somewhat more mature in their recovery in order to have that sense of value and worth in the community, and in the process, actually encourage more people to get into and sustain their recovery. And that's what led me to co-found the Certified Addiction Recovery Empowerment, or CARES Academy, here in Georgia with colleagues at the Georgia Council on Substance Abuse. That's our peer recovery coach training on the substance use side of the house. And then more recently, I developed a forensic peer mentor training called Ready for Reentry with colleagues at the Georgia Mental Health Consumer Network. So that's specifically for people who have lived experience in the criminal justice system. And of course, you know, the idea is, as a recovery coach, we take that lived experience and use it as a way of helping people who are either not yet in recovery or who are early in recovery learn to work the process in order to experience the benefits of that for themselves. So this is the real why of my life. It's about how people in these pictures have stood by me through thick and thin, through good and bad, and they are fundamentally what allows me to experience the benefits of my recovery. It's been 40 years since I was alcohol and drugs. And so as a person in recovery, there's been folks who have, in some cases, climbed down in the hole with me and were able to just basically say things are going to get better, and you've got skills and you've got abilities, and I'm here to support you in whatever way you think will be useful. So for me, that's the core foundation of what recovery support is about. And we have several items that I want to get through. Obviously, our agenda is we started at 3:30, and I promise we will end at 5. But I want, at the end of this, for you to be able to recognize 6 fundamental relationship enhancement skills. Now, for most of you, I expect you've had motivational interviewing training, and you'll recognize these as the same or similar skills that are taught in MI. The only difference is these skills have been taught under other types of names, and they have existed for many, many years before MI came along. So it's not anything really new, but the emphasis here is on not just learning the skills, but it's on how do you integrate paying attention to how well your interactions are going and using the skills as a starting point for assessing both your competence and your confidence and really being able to develop effective relationships with other people. And that's what that second objective is about. Really being able to demonstrate over time a progressive improvement toward mastery levels of having interactions with people who are in some cases very different from you and in other cases very similar to you. And then lastly, be able to model these skills and teach them to others through your individual and your group interactions. So that's just that's where we're headed, in other words, in the next about 45 minutes or so. So I'd like to invite you to open up a web browser. If you have a smartphone, you can use the browser that's on that phone. If you would, open it up and go to responseware.com. That's RESPONSEWARE.com. And when you get there, you can enter as guest. And then you'll need to type in the session ID CARES, or CARES. And what you'll get on your screen is a message that says the poll is not open, because in fact, I haven't opened the poll yet. So if you would, put in the chat when you are in the responseware.com site. Thank you, Deanna. Anybody else there yet? Very good, Virginia. Got one more. Okay, well, I want to go ahead and open the poll. So the question is, I know how effective I am while interacting with service recipients. And the answer choices are always, frequently, occasionally, almost never, or never. So how well do you know how effective you are with service recipients? So if you've got a touch screen, you can touch your answer. Otherwise, just use your mouse and click the button. And obviously, we're seeing the answers pop up on the screen. So about 10 more seconds. Everybody. Our survey says, all right, so most folks have the sense that you frequently know how effective the interactions are. Very interesting. So let's try this Brene Brown video. Lila, if you don't mind, launch the one that's on the, I guess I need to get out of sharing my screen again. Do that last time.
So what is empathy?
There we go.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy?
And why is it
Empathy
very different than
fuels
sympathy?
connection. Sympathy
Empathy
drives
fuels
disconnection.
connection. Sympathy
Empathy. It's
drives
very interesting.
disconnection.
Teresa Wiseman is a
Empathy.
nursing
It's
scholar
very interesting. Teresa
who
Wiseman
studied
is a nursing scholar
professions, very
who
diverse
studied
professions where empathy is relevant, and
professions,
came up with
very
four
diverse
qualities of
professions
empathy.
where empathy is relevant,
Perspective
and came up
taking,
with 4 qualities of empathy.
the ability to take the
Perspective
perspective of
taking,
another person, or
the
recognize
ability
their
to take the
perspective as
perspective
their
of another
truth,
person,
staying
or
out of
recognize
judgment,
their perspective
not
as their
easy
truth,
when you enjoy it as
staying
much as
out
most
of
of us do.
judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most.
Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you can climb down. I know what it's like down here. And you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no. You want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. Yeah. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
Main takeaways from the movie. What stands out to you? Anybody?
Hi, I'm Vicky. You hear me? Yes, hi, I'm Vicky. I was the one who was trying to
Yes, ma'am.
get through before. Hi. I would say it's definitely true because sometimes we say things we mean well and we want to help the other person, but sometimes that makes it harder. So the best thing to do is to just be there. Sometimes that's the best comfort.
Okay.
I just wanted to add,
And you really find people respond just by being there.
I just wanted to add that
Go ahead.
it's just being honest, just approaching a situation with curiosity and honesty, really builds on that connection. You don't have to make anything up. You don't have to make a response up, but just be there and say, I don't know. I don't have the answers and I don't know what you must be going through right now, but I'm here.
Well, so one of the most surprising things to me was I didn't know deers ate sandwiches. Just kidding. Well, and I think Dr. Brown does a really good job of illustrating the value of being with as opposed to solving problems. And I find a lot of times, particularly with fairly new recovery coaches, there's a tendency to have to, in order to deal with that internal discomfort, to do something to offer a solution. And particularly if I have a similar experience, it's almost as though I'm compelled to tell the other person, this is what I did in order to get rid of that problem or to address that problem or to make myself feel better. And sometimes that gets in the way. It's not necessarily helpful. It makes us feel better if we're not really paying attention to how it lands with the other person. And so it really is being attuned both to your sense of discomfort and being okay with being uncomfortable, as well as the other person's anxiety or stress or whatever term they use to describe it. And just giving voice to the fact that we're both sitting here in this deep, dark cave and this feels yucky. This sucks, without necessarily having to jump to, and here's the solution. Or here's what's worked for me in the past. Maybe you should try that. That's the real challenge. And it becomes a significant part of sometimes relationship building, to be able to just start with how well do I understand the other person's perspective. Any of y'all involved in the last webinar that I did on empathy? Maybe. Okay, so no, none of you. All right, well, so in your handout, there is a graphic that shows Elizabeth Siegel's model of empathy that breaks it out into interpersonal empathy and social empathy. And the 7 elements start with an affective response. So knowing that you're going to have this physiological reaction, and sometimes it is, how do I say it? It's imperceptible. Other times it absolutely dominates our experience, our consciousness, and we cannot ignore it. And everything in between. But that affective response is often what leads to the affective mentalizing, which is basically understanding or making up a story to explain that physiological arousal based on our experience. And then creating that sense of awareness that this is me and my experience right now, which is different than the experience of the other person right now. And being able, in the fifth component, to regulate that emotion in us that may be driving us either in an approach situation where we feel good about something, or we want to move towards helping the person, or an avoidance response, which is, this is too yucky, or this is too close to my experience. It clangs on trauma that I've experienced in the past. But being able to regulate that emotion to the point at which we then can really begin to understand, this is my experience of what's going on right now versus this is the other person's experience. And to be able to keep those two kind of in separate frames in our mind. And it's not about ignoring mine or ignoring the other person, but it's really, can I hold on to both of those? Because your intuition is telling you something important. So it's not about ignoring that any more than it is ignore the other person's perspective or their point of view. So once you've got that emotional regulation, so that you're not completely sucked into, oh my gosh, this is actually happening to me, but you see that in fact this is the other person's experience. Then we move into social empathy, which is about what are the contextual elements that are contributing to what this person has experienced or is experiencing now. This is where we can get into conversations about systemic barriers that people experience, oppression and discrimination, both in my personal experience, but also in terms of my culture that I'm a part of, and those influences that can get handed down from generation to generation to generation. And even though I may not have experienced it firsthand myself, it's still part of what I've been taught to do in order to manage my health and safety in today's world. And then the last component is this macro self-other awareness, and literally being able to step into and imagine what it's like to be in that other person's shoes. And ultimately, that's what leads to social justice, the ability to help people to overcome those barriers and those discriminations. And that's essentially what we're really trying to get to over the course of multiple interactions with people. So empathy is, for me, the only way I know that I'm being empathetic is when the other person has the sense that I understand their situation. In other words, empathy doesn't happen in me. Empathy happens in between me and the other person. I can have all kinds of feelings going on inside of me. That's not empathy. What's empathy is if the other person says, yeah, you get me, you understand me. And it's not about judgment. It's not about are you right or are you wrong. It's just, this is your perspective. This is your worldview. And I don't have to judge whether it's right or wrong. It's just, that's what is. And then we can talk about where do you go for next steps and what are your resources? How do you think I can support you? But that's the full model of empathy. and this is laid out in your handout on the next page through the with the description of each one of those 7 elements. Comments or questions about that model? Does it make sense? Thank you, Virginia. Good. Okay, so the point is the first 5 are intrapersonal. Intra meaning within. And we get to the interpersonal level when we're able to regulate our emotional reaction and recognize it as ours and different from the emotion that's being expressed and the experiences behind those emotions by the other person. So, anybody recognize that? What is that? What do you see over there on the right? And feel free to unmute if you like.
George, you aren't sharing the PowerPoint.
Oh my goodness. Well, that's weird. Could have sworn I was. Let me figure out how to do that. Thanks for letting me know. It says I'm sharing. Okay, there we go. All right, so what is that? Can you see it now? Anybody, what is that thing over there on the right?
It looks like a Q-tip.
You don't see it. Can you see my screen?
It looks like a Q-tip.
A Q-tip. It definitely is a Q-tip. So if I could give you a present today, it would be a Q-tip. And what that means is it's an abbreviation that basically means quit taking it personally. So what do you do with Q-tips? You take them and you clean your ears. That's one use for them, a very common use. So the process of empathy involves being able to regulate your emotional reaction to what the other person is describing to you. And we hear a lot of stories of traumatic experiences, of heartache, of really bad things happening to people. And that triggers in us some kind of a reaction. You wouldn't be in this business if you weren't the kind of individual who hearing those experiences resonates with you deeply on the inside. And again, sometimes the way it resonates, it's imperceptible. You can't really even tell. And then other times it just screams so loud at you that you can't think of anything else. And maybe the way you cognitively label that is, oh my God, that is absolutely horrific. But again, it's separating out, this is my reaction, my experience to what I'm hearing described from the actual experience of the other person who's describing their experience. And Q-tip is a way of hopefully helping you disengage and be able to hold both of your reaction and the other person's reaction in mind as you continue to work with the individual and explore how you can be supportive to her or him. So, you ask the question, so what is peer support? And I really think it's important to make the distinction between peer and clinical support. So one of the guides that I find really informative is called intentional peer support. And Sherry Mead has 3 guidelines that she recommends. And if you'll notice on your handout, there are blanks where you're going to need to write the information in. So let me pull up this handout and show you exactly what I'm talking about. So right here, and right here, and right here, those are blanks that I want you to write down the answers to, and you'll see it here underlined in the PowerPoint. Got that? So the 3 guidelines are peer support is about support, which means building mutually supportive relationships. And I want you to get this because that word mutual is really important here. Because for me, and I'm a clinician. I hope you won't hold that against me. That's what I did the first 20 years of my professional career. And this to me is the mutual part is what clearly distinguishes my work as a clinician from my work as a peer recovery support service provider. Second is building mutually beneficial relationships and the challenges that come along with doing that. And then practice intentionally not knowing, or what I abbreviate as PINK. I want to take just a minute and talk about each one of these guidelines. So mutual support, that means we're really talking about a two-way street. And there's no wrong answers or right answers or statements. And to the extent that I am willing to help the other person is often equally contingent upon my willingness to accept support from her or him. That's the mutual part of it. So the primary questions are, was it effective for promoting a mutually supportive and challenging relationship? Well, what is it? Well, it could be the last statement or response that came out of my mouth. Did it enhance the quality of this relationship or not? And I know this can get kind of mind-boggling, but as I'm having interactions with people, I literally need to pay attention to how did that statement that I just made, how did that land with the other person? What does that tell me about the direction this relationship is going in? So again, it's recognizing that my perspective and point of view is different than the other person's, and being able to monitor interaction from statement to statement to statement to see whether or not it's landing well. And you do this at least unconsciously, if not consciously, when you're talking to your peers. And when you say kind of the wrong thing, or you say something that triggers a reaction in them, that you just know that was not a good thing to say, or the reaction you got was different than what you were expecting. And then, was your last interaction or session effective? And again, this is part and parcel of how we learn to get better at this. It's about looking at and intentionally asking the question of how good was this last session or interaction? And then we can back up one more level and say, how good is my service or my program? Are we actually accomplishing both the short-term process objectives as well as the longer-term outcome objectives? And it all kind of falls into place. It's kind of like those Russian dolls where you take off one and there's another one, and you take off that one and there's another one, you take off that one, there's another. So if you're not intentional at the individual level about the quality of that relationship, it's going to have an interaction. It's going to have an effect on the quality of the overall interaction. And you put those interactions together, and all of those are going to impact the outcomes of your service or your program. So they're connected. It's a way of really being able to focus the attention on different elements in order to have opportunities to figure out what can I do differently to improve. And over time, by doing this, we actually are inviting a quality improvement process to guide the service delivery that we're providing. So the second guideline is about mutual challenge. How do we stretch into mutually challenging relationships? Well, Sherry Mead suggests 3 steps to the process. The first one is clarify your understanding of what your peer says is needed. And I can't tell you sometimes how hard that is. Because if I'm talking to somebody who is an active user and what they tell me is what I want to do is get a more pure supply of drugs, or I don't want to quit, but I'll consider cutting back. There's a part of me that screams at the top of my inside voice, no, that's not a good idea. But if I don't start with what that other person says they need, there's slim to no chance that we'll get to where the ultimate goal is, and slim left town. So it's about being sure you understand what that other person needs from their frame of reference or their point of view first. And then the second part that's challenging is expressing what you need. So again, this is a mutually supportive and mutually challenging relationships. And sometimes it's important for me to be able to say, here are the parameters of what I can or I am willing to do within this relationship. And there are things that you may ask me to do that go beyond that. And in order for us to have this relationship and for it to continue to get better over time, I need to be able to communicate to you what I need and what those boundaries are. And for you to be able to negotiate with me how we work out, if we run smack dab into one of those boundaries, how we're going to move forward without me compromising. And I will do the same for you in terms of if we run into one of the standards that you're holding and you think you can't move beyond that, how do I work within that? So it's that negotiation process. That's the third element here, negotiate with measured judgment. So if a peer asks me for my personal telephone number, or maybe they want to be my friend on Facebook, or maybe they want me to, I don't know, call their spouse and tell them they're going to be late because our session ran over. Those are examples of how it can present in the moment challenges to what my role is and what I'm comfortable doing within this relationship. We just got to be able to figure out a way that encourages each other to take the other person's standard and point of view into consideration and negotiate some mutual ground. And that's the third component down there at the bottom. How do we communicate in ways that encourages both me and the peer to step out of our current worldviews? And to do that in a way that promotes each of us being able to rewrite our stories and really talk about improvements to their temporary endings. So I'm thinking about an individual that I worked with one time who was shooting heroin and came to me and said, yeah, I'm not ready to get off of it, but I'll cut back, and really wound up having some bad experiences, couldn't get dope and all that kind of stuff, and wound up going to a hotel and locking the door for 3 days and effectively detoxed himself. And at the time I thought, well, that was kind of a crazy thing to do because no telling what could have happened. Anyway, fast forward 8 years, and that individual is now one of the recovery champions in his community. And it was about us really being able to be uncomfortable with what was happening in the moment, but still being able to acknowledge the value of kind of keeping that hope for where it is we're wanting to go. And it wasn't anything that I necessarily did, other than support what he was, kind of the excruciating experiences he went through. And I don't want to make it sound like it was a linear, once he got detoxed, oh, life turns into the wonderful things, because it wasn't. There were setbacks and all kinds of challenges that he experienced on the way. But again, it's about being able to kind of give up my values and the values that I hold for my recovery in order to entertain the frame of reference of another person and what their values and their standards are, in order to support them making progress toward whatever goal they're immediately wanting to work towards. And then the third element here is to practice intentionally not knowing. That's the whole point. You know, I often hear people say, well, I meet them where they are. Well, what the heck does that mean? Are you showing up at McWaffle Hut and that's because that's where they are? Well, it really is about understanding the person's frame of reference, their worldview, and where they want to go. So it's not literally meeting them literally where they are, although sometimes we do that as well. But it's being able to frame what's happening in that person's life and where they see themselves going from their perspective. Best way to do that is with curiosity and intuition and wonder. That's what Pink is all about. So the process for me is to practice intentionally not knowing, solicit feed forward about where is it you want to go, practice intentionally not knowing, including about what you think will work in order to make baby steps towards that objective. Solicit more feed forward, use Pink, solicit more feed forward. I really like this quote from Sherry Mead, who says, all you really need is the ability to be challenged, to stick with the process, and to express your needs while negotiating the needs of others. That expressing your needs part can be really, really challenging sometimes. And it's the difference between knowing that there are parameters, there are limits to what I can do because my agency says in order for me to get a paycheck, here's some things I can and I can't do, versus there are personally some aspects of recovery that are outside of my experience. And sometimes I might need to be okay with other people exploring that or looking into that as an option. So those are the three elements of peer support. So I'm going to stop talking here for a minute. And in your handout, you should have a copy of the Recovery Coach Role Distinction Exercise. Everybody got a copy of that? What I want you to do is to take that. I'm going to give you 2 minutes and have you go read those 11 statements. And in the box next to each activity, I want you to say whether or not that's an activity that's done by a mutual help group sponsor, like AANA. Is this something that a peer recovery coach does? Is it something that an addiction counselor does? Or is it something a priest, a chaplain, a clergy, or other faith leader? What questions do you have about this exercise? Okay, we're not seeing any or hearing any. I will start a timer. And so, your 2 minutes start now. Yeah, about 15 more seconds. Nice. So, what do you think? Let's see. Who wants to volunteer to tell us which of those activities a peer recovery coach does? You would unmute yourself, that'd be great.
So I chose number 4, number 5, and number 11. So a peer recovery coach can conduct individual recovery check-ins, facilitate a recovery group, and conduct recovery presentations that express hope based on personal lived experience, while emphasizing the many pathways to recovery.
Nice. So I'm curious. Can't do an AA
Hello?
Yeah.
Oh, hi. Yeah, I had just about the same as Miss Virginia. I did conduct an AA, NA, or other mutual help support group meetings. I believe a recovery coach can do that also. I don't see why not. If that's in your realm, that's what you feel comfortable getting up and leading a support group, whether it's opioid support group or whatever. A recovery coach can also do that along with the other ones that that Miss Virginia just said. Number 4, and I also have facilitate recovery group, which is 5, and also number 11. Yep, the same one she had. But yes, I believe that number 1, that a recovery coach can conduct an AA meeting, if they feel comfortable that they want to get up there and conduct an AA meeting.
Hi, I have for recovery coach, I have 4, 5, and 11. I did not put number 1 because I feel that in the material that would be more of the mutual help group sponsor.
Yes. Okay. So, I mean, it really sounds like we've got consensus around 4, 5, and 11. And the challenge is, if we do some particular pathways support group meeting, are we in fact stepping beyond the role of a recovery coach?
I'm here. Okay.
Here's my answer.
Well, it all depends. Like the reason why I put number 1 was because we're not being a sponsor. We're just, maybe someone may be sick and you want to step in for that person to conduct that meeting. Not pushing it on, for me personally, AANA is not my pathway. So for me to get up and try to do an AA or NA would be, not too good. But if someone felt comfortable, and maybe an example is someone got sick and you needed to fill in for someone, and you were a recovery coach or whatever, and you felt comfortable, by then you can step up and lead that meeting. Well, I believe you can lead that meeting. Because if someone was going to an all-recovery meeting, or something that I do like an opioid support group, I do myself. And that's what I feel comfortable with. So it's all on the individual. But as long as you're not stepping out of your boundaries, stepping out of your lane as a recovery coach, that's what you have to remember. Not to step out of your lane or your boundaries.
Okay. Well, so the challenge here is the degree to which, well, let me put it this way. If you're getting a paycheck, that organization has the right to define what that lane is that you have to stay within in order to get that paycheck. And honestly, if you are a sponsor in AA or NA or any other mutual help organization, I want you to be the absolute best sponsor the world has ever seen. However, if I am paying you to be a recovery coach in a recovery community organization, or going into jails or prisons or an emergency room or on a warm line, it's not about being a sponsor. It's about helping people figure out what their pathway is. And this is kind of where the claim comes in, because sometimes what we do is we walk in with a tool belt that's got all our recovery tools in it. And when somebody says, I need help, we reach into that tool bag and we say, here's the thing that helped me, and it should help you too. And if it means going to AA 90 and 90, or going to a sweat lodge, or exercising for 4 hours a day, a month in a row, yes, those are part of your pathway, but those may not be the first step resources that the peer that we're working with that will resonate with him or her. So that's where I think being aware of that other person's frame of reference, their worldview, and the resources they walk in with takes precedence over whatever's in our recovery tool belt. And so suggesting people go to AA or NA, it's not a bad idea unless you've got somebody who says, I've been there, done that, got the t-shirt, and it didn't work. And so it's really kind of figuring out how do you do this in a way that first prioritizes what that other person, what resources they're walking in the door with. And then once you've kind of exhausted that list, then you can reach into your tool bag and pull out, well, here's some things you've thought about trying. All that makes sense or not so much? So I think you're all right, is kind of the point there. So these are, well, let's do one more poll question. So everybody still got your app available? You should now see this poll question on your screen. If you would, indicate whether or not you think empathy, genuineness, and positive regard are the necessary and sufficient conditions for change to occur. And you can either agree, disagree, or not so sure. And you have about 15 seconds to answer. Our survey says, okay. So a couple folks not sure. Got one person that, yeah, thinks that's probably right. Anybody recognize that old fart? Actually, I shouldn't say that. I should have much more respect. That is Carl Rogers, the father or one of the fathers of humanistic psychology. And back in 1957, yes, people were able to write and publish scientific research back then even. He wrote an article called The Necessary and Sufficient Conditions of Therapeutic Personality Change, in which he proposed that the only thing that was necessary and that was sufficient to produce change in relationships was displaying empathy, genuineness, and positive regard. Lest you think this is just some ancient philosophy, Michael Lambert, who's a psychologist out at the University of Utah, did a meta-analysis, which basically is a study of all the studies that have been conducted. And what he found was that empathy, positive regard, and genuineness all contributed more to outcomes than the model or technique that was used. So without getting into all the statistics, 31, 27, and 24 are all higher than 20. So if you're talking about whether or not you use the cognitive behavioral approach or EDMR or whatever, the model that you use is less impactful than whether you're able to demonstrate empathy, positive regard, and genuineness. That's the results of the study. So I want to suggest that behavior is always a function of the interaction among people and environments. I don't know about you, but I went through school and they taught me a whole bunch of stuff about the fact that problems of people were primarily due to things inside of them. And in particular, for those of us who had substance use challenges or behavioral health challenges, the problem was in us. It was in our genes. Well, fact of the matter is that's only looking at half of what causes people to engage in behaviors. The other half has to do with environmental contributions. So part of what I'm proposing here is that not only do we really learn how to monitor and regulate our internal environment, but that we be puzzled and inquisitive about what's in the environment that's also contributing to the experience that we're having now and to the experiences that people are walking in the door with. So in order to learn more about who you're talking with and explore his or her experience, I suggest using something. Well, for a lot of people, the first thing they say is, oh, that's a rocky horse. Well, yeah, it's a rocky horse. I suggest it's an Orsi. And the other thing that tends to stand out about it that is very unusual is that not only is it a Orsi, it's a pink Orsi. So hopefully now you have a visual image that's burned deep into your mind, help you remember the fundamental relationship enhancement skills. So the first step is to practice intentionally not knowing, or pink, which is another way of saying curiosity. And to do that using a set of relationship enhancement skills that starts with pink and then goes on to include open-ended questions and closed questions, as well as affirmations or validations and reflections or paraphrases and summaries. And then once all that's occurred, information is provided. Now, the trick here is to understand how we have tendencies to use particular skills. And what I'm prompting you to do is to really be intentional about how you use each of these skills and when during your interactions. And I think probably for me, the most challenging of all those skills has to be doing affirmations and validations. And what I mean by that is the phrase I hear, or I used to hear coming out of my mouth most often was, oh, I think that's really wonderful. Oh, that's awesome. Or, oh, that's really cool. Or that's really good. Well, unfortunately, that's a judgment. That's not an affirmation or a validation. In order for it to be an affirmation or a validation, it's got to be based on some observed strength or element of that person's character. And so that video at the beginning was about how that individual was able to validate people. And fundamentally, for me, the goal that I have in interactions with people that I want them to value the relationship with me is for at some point during that interaction, for that person to get a little squirt of oxytocin. I did not say OxyContin, I said oxytocin. That's the neurotransmitter that is associated with empathy and bonding and those sorts of things. But I want them to have that little squirt of oxytocin that allows them to have the sense that they feel felt. In other words, and I'm not meaning that in any kind of kinky sort of way, but that I get their perspective, I get their point of view. Again, it's not about whether I think it's right or wrong, good or bad, just that I get it. And that is the challenge, I think, with doing this work effectively. So when people say, yeah, you really do understand, that for me is the ultimate goal. So it's using this combination of skills and doing it in a way that I'm able to, in the moment, see that we're having a relationship that's effective, and that ideally we're getting to a level of quality that didn't exist perhaps when that relationship first started. And being able to track that over time is an important element. So begin with the assumption that recovery means different things for different people, and discover the core reasons this person is seeking services. Now, by core, I mean, and I use that as an abbreviation standing for a craving or recurring experience. And for a lot of people, they access services because they are having cravings, or they recognize they're in the midst of a dependency on a drug or alcohol or something else. Often it's dependency on another person in a relationship, or it's some kind of recurring experience. And it's in behavioral health world, it could be I keep having bouts of depression where I can't drag myself out of the bed for multiple days in a row. Or I hear these voices and they're telling me to do things I don't want to do. So, but the idea here is really be curious about what is that core reason this person is coming here. And if I can communicate that accurately to the other person, then we can kind of move on into talking about what are the next steps. So while I'm doing this, I'm building a mind map. And you know, you do that, right? You fill in your mind different elements of the experiences that you're having, including the people that you come into contact with. Right now, you've got a mind map that's labeled George Brott, and there's specific elements that you've already put in that mind map. So if somebody in the near future says something about this guy named George Brott, you'll say, oh yeah, I know him, and these are the things that stand out about him. You won't say it that way necessarily, but we naturally do this. And so what I'm suggesting is that when we are interacting with our peers, there are 4 domains of elements that we may want to pay attention to. The first one has to do with how is the person doing individually in terms of their intrapersonal health. And this really gets to their physical and mental health. And what's that been like in the last week? And then secondly is the interpersonal domain. This has to do with who are your primary and most intimate supports. What's going on in those relationships? And then the third element is the social domain. Who are the people you hang out with? Who are the people, and for most of us, there's social roles. So who are the people that we go to work with or go to school with? And what's going on in those domains of our lives? And then for me, one of my fundamental ways of defining, I'm not in recovery unless I'm having fun. So what have you done in the last week to have fun, and who did you do it with? All that fits within that social domain. And then the last domain is just overall in terms of your general well-being. What's the last week been like for you? So it's kind of being attentive to filling in each of those 4 domains. So practicing intentionally not knowing, using open-ended questions, affirmations, reflections, summaries, and information so that we're filling in individual, interpersonal, social, and overall domains of that other person's worldview and life experience. So I ask you to watch a video and to fill out one of those interaction analysis based on it. Anybody had the opportunity to do that? So you want an example of an affirmation? Well, so Virginia, I can say that it seems as though you are a person who is really interested in getting better at developing the quality of your relationships, because you came and attended this workshop when you probably had, I don't know, 5, 10, 15 other things that you could have been doing this afternoon. That's an affirmation. Make sense? And again, it's tied to a specific observable behavior, quality, or characteristic. You're welcome. So what did you think about Alan? What did he do that you really liked?
Yes.
He was very attentive. That's
I
exactly
think
right.
he was. He did give the client a lot of affirmation, validation. I think, in a way, I'm trying to remember now exactly where. Kind of like, and sort of like, I think he met her where she's at to some degree, kind of trying to understand her. You know, like, okay, so you want to do this, okay, and I think he made it try to so she can clearly understand. Yes, the information he gave her, the information, very informative, but also like in a way that was affirming and also, I guess, reflecting a lot to where she's at.
Anything else stand out about what Alan did? So the pacing was slow and easy and wasn't rushed. Good. Well, one of the things that, for me, and part of the reason why I like that video, is that he does a great job of mixing in, well, paraphrases and reflections and giving information without it sounding like proclamations or telling her what she should know or should do, but rather inviting her to consider the information. And yeah, he was quiet and understanding. So in the actual tally, I've got him asking 13 open-ended questions. He asked 2 closed-ended questions. And by the way, closed-ended questions are appropriate at times. He used about 8 paraphrases or reflections, including and 1 double-sided reflection where he kind of talked about, well, on the one hand this, but on the other hand that. And then there were 8 information-giving statements. So what could have been better about the interaction, do you think? Y'all gonna get silent on me now? Nothing could have been better. It was perfect as it was. I'll let Alan know. He's a colleague of mine, by the way. Well, so asking that question is an important part of the process, and I'm not fishing for you to. There's not some hidden gem there that I'm wanting you to talk about. But it's really about having the opportunity to reflect on our experience, including after we have interactions. And I know you do this. He says maybe could have sounded more enthusiastic. Yes. So he's British, and there's this kind of demure interaction style, unflappable. No matter what she said, he probably was going to continue kind of being exactly the way you saw on that screen. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. But yeah, that's a great comment. So again, it's about the process of how you learn to get better at building relationships, and the quality of those relationships is what really does matter. So we'll skip this part. I was going to kind of run through some exercises, but we only have a few more minutes left. So this is something that you can use as you work with others on your team. It's a great exercise to I'll just pick one here. Truly says, number 4, Truly says, I partied hardy after getting released from jail yesterday. And I know it was a violation of my supervision, and everybody's fed up with the fact that I do that. But I'm tired of everybody reminding me, because I just needed to go blow off some steam. And you know what? I have made up my mind that I am now going to stop using it. And my plan is to find a job and just stay focused. How would you pick out an affirmation from that statement? What could you say to validate the strengths that are being exhibited in that statement? And so if you pass this out and have all your recovery coaches fill it out, it'll be an interesting exercise. What I would say is that Truly has expressed a real determination to move forward, and she's made a commitment to finding a job and staying on track. And again, it's not about is it right or wrong, is it good or bad. It's just if you pull out of, and sometimes it's muddy and it's yucky and it's hard to find, but if you pull out the strengths and you reflect that back or you paraphrase that, and by the way, the difference between a reflection and a paraphrase, a reflection focuses on the emotion that the person is expressing, not necessarily the words by themselves. And a paraphrase is more on the cognitive side, what they're thinking. Some people tend to be more emotional in their communication and what they focus on. Others tend to be more cognitive. And the degree to which you can match that in how you reply to them. So if somebody's being all emotional and you come out with this cognitive stuff about what they should think and all that, that is going to cause a mismatch. On the other hand, if somebody's talking all cognitive about what they think, and you come back with, well, you feel this or you feel that, there's a mismatch. So that's an example of how you could use this to really help people practice. And again, I think affirmations or validations are one of the most challenging aspects. I've worked with people who literally had just gotten rearrested for the 10th time and were on their way to a life sentence in prison, and trying to think of what sort of skill and strength and ability that person had that I could affirm and validate. It can be really challenging. So how do you use this? Well, what I suggest is that one of the things that you may find most valuable is to role play common or typical scenarios that you run into with the people who you provide services, and do that using colleagues. So one of you be the peer, one of you be the peer coach, and you use that analysis sheet to actually look at what are the statements that come out of your mouth. And while you're doing the role play, pay attention to your gut reaction or your intuition and the disturbances in your equanimity. Equanimity is one of those kind of funny words. It really means your sense of balance. Are you able to keep that emotional regulation as people talk about the challenges that they're facing in life? And the goal is to have an enhanced sense of psychological flexibility or mindfulness. And then once you've kind of gotten the sense of what the different elements are, those 6 different skills, obtain permission from the service recipients and actually video and audio record your interactions with them. And in the handout, there is a sample form that you can do in order to get that consent. I know that creeps people out. And what my experience is for the service providers who get creeped out about it, it's not because the people that they're providing services to will be creeped out about it. It's just because this is a challenge. And if you go into the situation explaining that I want to get better at learning how to do this, and one of the ways that we do that here at this organization is we record our interactions and we go back and look at them and we analyze what we did well and we talk about what could have been better, I find 99.9% of the time the people that are receiving the services say, sure, go ahead. They don't have a problem with it. It's the service provider has a problem with it more often than not. So anyway, that's the suggestion. Role play it, get used to understanding the differences in the kinds of skills, record interactions, use the interaction analysis form, do that same analysis, and then conduct the self-assessment. And what you're looking for are patterns in who you bond with easily versus who presents challenges to you, and when do you experience that emotional turmoil that rises up inside of you. What are the challenges or the life situations that cause that to happen inside of you? Then once you've done that, share your self-assessments in peer performance support groups and or with your supervisors and solicit feed forward. It's the same 2 questions. What did you do well, and what do you think you could be better at it? And then lastly, repeat the above and use, there's a form that's linked in the journal called First Interaction Roles and Goals. So You put this in the context of your organization's job description. It's about how do I explain to somebody who I am, what's a peer coach, particularly for people who've never heard of it before, and how do I distinguish my role from that of clinicians that they've had a lot of experiences with, some of which might be really negative, some of which might be really positive, in most cases it's a mixture of that. How do I separate out who I am and what I'm here to do from their experiences with all the other people? And I'll often start off with the phrase, I do things perhaps a little differently than what you're used to, because what's most important to me is your view of what you need and how I can support you in getting that. And a lot of folks have never heard that kind of statement before. So that is essentially what is in this form. And I really want to point out on this third page, part of the assessment process is for you to actually say during this interaction, I'm at this level of competency, either fundamental, novice, intermediate, standard, advanced, or expert. And if you do this on a regular basis, what you'll find is that you're legitimately able to increase which of those boxes you check because of both the experience, but also the intentional feedback that you get from sharing this with both with peers, but also with supervisors. So we talked about 6 fundamental relationship enhancement skills. You're able to now self-assess your progressive improvement toward a mastery level of competence and competence using the skills. And hopefully now you'll be better able to teach relationship enhancement by modeling these skills during individual and group interactions. So according to my clock, we are over time. I appreciate your time and your attention. I apologize for going over, but if you would please make sure that you fill out a feedback form. Tell me what will make this presentation or this webinar better the next time. And I want to leave you with this. Sometimes working in this field, you feel like the frog, and sometimes you feel like the crane, but the point really is to never give up. And start by doing what's necessary and then do what's possible, and then suddenly you may find that you're doing the impossible. And that's a quote from St. Francis of Assisi, who literally did change the world. So thank you all very much. I appreciate your time and your attention. And we'll do it again in about a month. Lila, any closing comments or thoughts?
No, I think everyone is all set.
Good. And so folks will actually get the feedback form when they...
Yep, I will send out an email through Protrax. They will receive that.
Very good. Thank you all very much, and be well.
Thank you, George.
You're welcome.